Hello and welcome to Aviadev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the African aviation industry with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of Aviadev Africa. Welcome to our very first episode of 2023. I'm delighted to say that I am joined not by one, but by two guests today. Both are new voices on the podcast, but the organization they work with and represent has a long-standing partnership with Aviadev and will be present at this year's Aviadev Africa taking place in Nairobi this June. Embraer boasts many customers on the African continent and continues to add new operators. In today's episode, we will be discussing the dominant trends that they believe will shape 2023, new projects on the horizon, and plenty more besides. So settle in for some great insight direct from those shaping our great industry. By name, my guests are Stephane Hannemann, the VP of Sales and Marketing for the Middle East and Africa. He actually started his Embraer journey in the African market and has come full circle. And he's also joined by Akie Chabra, who is the sales director who joined the team just in 2022. He's based in Johannesburg and has a background in aviation and finance. So welcome to the podcast, gents.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Akie. I'm sending my regards to you from Brazil, from our headquarters.
And this is amazing, hey, that I'm in the UK, you're in Brazil, and Akie's in South Africa, and we're having this conversation. It would always be better with a cup of coffee or something else, but you know, it's great to be able to get us all together for sure. So let's go straight into what we want to talk about, and let's start by looking back at 2022. But in terms of the region itself and how it performed, how did the region perform? How did Embraer perform? How would you rate 2022 as we emerge from the pandemic?
Yes, John, I think you've just said it. We are emerging from the pandemic. So if I look back at 2022, I would say I see two sides to 2022. So the first half of last year, I would say, was still very much dominated by the pandemic. We had hoped already at the beginning of last year, we would see the recovery starting very early in the year. But that wasn't the case. There were still a lot of travel restrictions. Traveling was very difficult across the continent and even getting into the continent. So I would say the first half of last year, that was really still pretty much at standstill. Then I would say right across the middle of 2022, when the first travel restrictions started to be relieved, I think that's really where we saw the market recovering in terms of passengers returning to the airport, starting to travel again across the regions, some domestic traffic, some intra-regional traffic. And then, of course, also the long-haul traffic started to come back with also the international carriers deploying more capacity into the continent. And, of course, the local airlines are starting to build up capacity again. I think on a African level, for the entire year of 2022, I think it's still been a very difficult year for all of the airlines. Unfortunately, we've seen some of the airlines, of course, leave the market, especially in Southern Africa. Some very well-known brands as Comair, Kulula, Mango. Unfortunately, these guys have not made it through the pandemic. So I think it was very difficult for the airlines to build back capacity. Some carriers were able to bring capacity back quicker than others. So I would expect that on a full year level for the airlines, 2022, financially speaking, was very difficult. And I think we'll talk about that later, that a lot of the focus of the airlines is certainly now going to go into rebuilding from a financial point of view, returning to profitability. For Embraer, the years actually, even through the pandemic, have been quite successful in terms of the number of aircraft that are operating within the region. Over the last 2 years, we've grown the fleet across Middle East and Africa to around about 250 aircraft. So that's around 25 more aircraft than we've had in 2020. So I think we're very satisfied with the fleet continuing to grow. The operator base is also growing, which I believe shows that the African market is continuing to focus on rightsizing, is continuing to focus on connectivity. Connectivity on the continent is still really lacking behind other regions. Certainly, that's one of the main focus points that we have with airlines. And as we wrapped up 2022, we've been able also to welcome some new operators in the region. So we see a continued recovery, and we look very, very optimistic into the future on the African continent.
I think you've covered quite a lot of what I was going to say, because we talked quite a lot at Aviadev about there being a bit of a shift in mindset post-COVID, coming out of that and looking at different things, looking things a different way. And obviously a big buzzword for Embraer, which you kind of own, is this concept of rightsizing. It's a really nice term that we've talked about quite a lot. And there's some real sort of data that backs up this in the African market. So as we move into 2023, I wanted to discuss with you what you think the dominant trends would be and what the airline executives are telling you. So Akie, obviously you're meeting with these guys on a regular basis, same with you, Stephane, but give us a bit of an overview, Akie, in terms of what's keeping the airlines up at night, what the trends are that they think, and where they're at, basically.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon to you. Firstly, fantastic to be on this podcast alongside Stephane. John, the interactions that I've had with airline executives, specifically in the last quarter of 2022, looking ahead at 2023, the main subject that they've really pointed at was financial sustainability. I think a lot of airlines are only starting to see solvency and liquidity now after going through the COVID-19 crisis. And the most important aspect for the bulk of the airlines would be to preserve their balance sheet at this point and really turn their balance sheet more than anything. I think, of course, there'll always be room for airline operators to look at new projects and opportunities, specifically within the environmental sustainability space. And there have always been a fair few airlines that have inquired about the possibility of being involved in focus groups and advisory boards. However, I personally feel that in the Southern African market, at least, 2023 is still very much the year of rebalancing, potentially right-sizing and really preserving the financial health of the various airlines and operators. One of the sort of second dominant trends that I can sort of talk about is really regional growth at the moment. The Air Service Licensing Council within South Africa and the broader licensing councils in Southern Africa, they've been cooperating quite well with a lot of the carriers. And it's really allowed them during this period to not just look at domestic operations, but also grow their regional footprint. I think what this ensures is that the airlines no longer have to just worry about a domestic market, and they can also look at the regional space. I think Aviadev would be one of the examples where, alongside a lot of the other forums, where a lot of these conversations are evolving. And to me, at the moment, with this particular regional growth, there's a high likelihood that tourists and business travelers in the region will see more and more options emerging on routes which were previously inhibited or maybe even closed down because of COVID. And we will finally get to see more cross-border growth within Southern Africa and the rest of Africa. But I think really to summarize from my end, if I sit down in front of an airline executive right now, we are definitely talking about environmental ventures. We are talking about, various other ventures, but the main theme at the moment is really sticking to the financial sustainability concept. It's to ensure that that balance sheet is very much healthy and it can survive any other macroeconomic issues that may come up in the near future. But for now, I think that is really the buzzword. So I think for us at Embraer, we are looking at, I would say, three concepts that we really want to discuss with most airline executives. One is financial sustainability, definitely. The second one is the right sizing of the market. And I think the third one is, how can we assist with market education? How can we educate an airline executive and operator, the underlying management a little bit better in order for us to make more informed decisions as we venture into 2023? But as a general summary, those are the trends that we are noticing.
Yeah, it's a great summary. And you're quite right to say, obviously for sustainability to happen, you have to be able to invest. And to be able to invest, you have to have the profit, you have to have the money, the capital to actually invest in the sustainability. So you've got to put one before the other to be able to do both of them successfully. I think the second thing that's really encouraging, which is the whole reason Aviadev was set up, is that where I always saw the opportunity is for improved intra-regional connectivity. It wasn't about getting more flights to and from the continent. It was connecting the continent better. When you compare it to other parts of the world, and yet you look at the distances, you look at the demographics, it's a no-brainer to sort of say this is the opportunity. And this is obviously where the Embraer product fits really well. So, Steph, anything from your side to add to what Akie and I've said?
I think that Akie has brought the main points. It's really for the airlines right now around building back from a financial point of view. as I said before, I think 2022 will still go down in history as a very challenging year from a financial point of view. So I think the airlines have, from my point of view, also used the pandemic in order to understand how shall they fly out of the pandemic from a strategic point of view. That could see changes in terms of their approach to fleet. We are, of course, talking to them about how we as an aircraft manufacturer can support them. Some of the airlines have really started to make some strategic shifts in terms of their networks. I think that before the pandemic, there was a rush from many airlines to venture off into long-haul operations, which are strategic for many of the countries. And of course, there's a lot of status and pride involved in terms of flying long-haul operations. But those operations tend to be also, from a financial point of view, bearing quite a lot of risks. So I think as we move forward, we will see more airlines focusing on building regional connectivity. We were just talking about it. And just to enrich it perhaps with a couple of facts, there's only 10% of the trips currently originating from the African continent which are staying within the region. And that's very low if you compare this to other parts of the world, Europe or Asia. Those percentages tend to be a lot higher. So I think there's a lot of market potential there. And then it's not only the connectivity, it's also sometimes the frequency. Only 17% of all intra-African flights are operated on a daily frequency or more. I think in other regions of the world, especially on some of the more meaningful markets, we always have daily or double or triple daily flights. And I think as we move forward, and this is something that we feel very strongly about at Embraer with our portfolio of regional jets, really from the ERJ family, which remains very popular in Africa. As a matter of fact, over the last couple of years, on a yearly basis, there's been more ERJs going into the African continent on a pre-owned basis. So that really shows that the airlines are putting a lot of focus even on the 50-seater segment, like the guys at Airlink, for instance, in South Africa, which have a fleet of almost, or I think, around about 30 ERJs. They use this aircraft type extremely profitable. So I think we'll see a lot of airlines trying to focus also on building frequency, which certainly is going to help in terms of building and tapping into more growth opportunities around trade and tourism. And then the last trend that I truly see is for airlines to focus around bringing more flexibility into their systems. And flexibility, that comes in many ways. If we talk about fleet, flexibility certainly comes around the different capacity segments that airlines have. The only thing that I know for sure as we look into the future is our industry is going to have to absorb future internal or external shocks. We've had it in the past. I think the industry is getting more resilient, but we clearly see with airlines focusing around building in even more flexibility. And during the pandemic, I think all of the airlines that have jets recognized the strategic importance of these aircraft. And there's a lot of carriers which were not on the regional platforms yet, the likes of Ethiopian Airlines. They're currently looking into complementing their fleet of turboprop and narrow-body aircraft in the middle with regional jets. So I think that's something that we'll see very strongly into the future, these kind of conversations around strengthening the regional jet profile.
Yeah, definitely. Great point on the frequency and great point about some of the customers that you've got. You know, FastJet is another one that's offering huge amount of frequency on their routes. Africa World Airlines have done this for many, many years, and it's been the hallmark of their success, and they obviously make it profitable. And of course, the golden child is of course Airlink, which has a slightly different strategy, but all Embraer operators and fantastic stories to be told for sure. So sticking with you for a minute, Stephane, just to look into the future a little bit, because there's a lot of talk, a lot of people excited about new projects at Embraer. Where are we at in terms of the different things that we've heard about? Obviously, it's quite a diverse business, getting involved in cargo conversions and eVTOLs and turboprops and all sorts that we've heard over the last couple of years. So where are we up to? What are the main projects you guys are focused on at the moment?
Yeah, so as you just said, there's a lot of developments which are truly exciting. You touch base on quite a variety of them. I think in my mind, looking at the region, there's four developments in terms of our product portfolio, which I believe have very strong value for the region. The first one is definitely DE2 family. That's our product platform for commercial aviation, certainly for the next decade to come. And the DE2 is truly groundbreaking in terms of the economics, the environmental footprint it's going to offer to the airlines. And we've started to see now the Middle East and Africa region moving forward on their fleet procurement in the regional jet segment, choosing the E2. So we already have Air Peace in Nigeria flying the E2. We will see this year already the entry into service with Royal Jordanian and with Salam Air in Oman, so as the wider part of the Middle East and Africa region. And the E2 is going to deliver very strongly for the airlines in terms of adding more variety and choice around growing from the current E-Jet legacy. So the first legacy E-Jets that Kenya Airways, Airlink are flying, Royal Air Morocco is flying into the future, especially the 195 E2, which is in a dual class configuration, an aircraft with around 124 seats, is highly interesting for the African environment. This aircraft is offering unit cost very similar to a narrow body aircraft, great range, great performance, great passenger appeal, 2x2 seating arrangements. So a lot of the focus from our sales team right now is around the E2, and we're talking to all of the main airlines on the continent, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to win new customers and, of course, continue to have the confidence of the customers we already have on the continent moving from the E1 to the E2. The second product platform that you mentioned is the P2F. So our passenger to freighter for the E190 and E195 E1 generation aircraft. This is going to be a solution that we believe has very high appeal on the African continent. In terms of the payload, it's around 13 to 14 tons between the two aircraft types. And it fits really ideally in between the ATR, or let's say the turboprop freighters, and narrow body freighters such as 737, A320 freighters. And we've last year already during the Farnborough Air Show announced our first airline customer, which is in the region with Astral, Sanjeev, who we have a great relationship that we built over the years. We're very delighted that Sanjeev is going to move with the E190 freighters. They're going to partner up with NAC. NAC as the lessor, they've signed a firm commitment for up to 10 P2Fs with us, and the project's moving forward very well. We've done the first metal cut towards the end of last year. That's an important step in the overall process, and we shall see the first aircraft to be delivered around 2024, towards the second half of 2024. So we're making great progress, and we believe that there's a big potential to growing the P2Fs in the African market, and of course also on a more global context. I think, Akie, you are also presenting P2F updates to various airlines, so there's big interest from the airline community on the continent. And then I would say that the last one or two projects that we're looking into and where there's a lot of focus in the company would be the Energia family. That's our concept around how the future of flying is going to look like. That's really Embraer's approach in terms of leading the way and continue to build our leadership position around the most modern, most sustainable aircraft platforms. Those are going to be net zero propulsion aircraft. We are looking at this point in time into hybrid electric and into hydrogen electric aircraft in the 19 to 30 seater segment initially. At a later point in time, we're also looking to expand this into around about 50 seats. And at this point in time, looking at entry into service around 2030 for the first product platform. And also we've seen a very big interest from the market. We've just had an advisory board towards the end of last year with over 25 airlines from around the world, thought leaders in the industry supporting us on the Energia family. And the last one, as you said, is Eve, right? The eVTOLs, which again, we've been able to sign MOU and LOI commitments across the continent. And that's a development that's also moving forward at pace.
Wow, fantastic. So yeah, plenty going on as usual from an R&D perspective. I think you've given us a really good overview of that. So let's dive into your market, Akie. Let's come back to you and let's talk about Southern Africa. Simply because it was such an interesting year, 2022, and the previous years as well. There's been so much flux in the market, especially in South Africa, that's had a knock-on impact in the whole of the SADC region. So There was undercapacity, obviously, in South Africa because of the loss of Comair, which took 40% of the seats out of the market. And that's driven really huge demand, loads of new aircraft or pre-owned aircraft coming into the market as well. And certain carriers becoming more, stronger than ever and taking that position in the market. So how do you see this year, 23, and going forward? Are we going to be in a period now of stabilization? What are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks, John. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that there was a massive void that was created in the market with the exits of Comair and Mango in South Africa. I think if you are a South African, you would have extremely fond memories of flying with Comair and Mango, especially with Kulula and their lovely taglines that they used to have on the side of the aircraft. Now, this, severely affected domestic and regional routes. And I think what made it worse was that the market was still recovering from COVID and the demand levels were just about coming back. And the markets locally within Southern Africa, in my mind, took a major hit with the exits of these carriers. Undercapacity was always going to be an issue when you've lost, the likes of Comair, Mango, Air Namibia. I mean, if you look at Comair in itself, you have 28 plus aircraft in their fleet, Mango with plus or minus 15 aircraft. And specifically on the trunk routes within Southern Africa, these airlines were dominant and they created a lot of seat capacity, which was lost. For me, the larger issue in 21-22 was definitely the compounded effect of various individual elements. As I said, you've lost carriers within Southern Africa. The fuel prices had gone up. There was less seats in the market, less frequencies. The overall effect really was that the prices went through the sky and the end consumer was left with very sort of limited purchase power. And that affected the underlying consumer base quite a bit. The other side of the coin here is to undercapacity is that it led to a strong growth within the operators that were left behind and the emergence of new operators in the region, which was not just exciting for the end consumer, but a massive positive within the Southern African market in terms of employment and the aviation sector in general. I think if we boil it down to pure numbers, Airlink, which is obviously Embraer's largest carrier in Africa, brought in an additional 13 aircraft since November 2020. Fly Sapphire brought in another 14 aircraft in that time. Lyft emerged as an airline during the pandemic and went from 2 aircraft to 6 aircraft in that space of time. We look at carriers outside of South Africa, and you've got success stories such as Fly Namibia, FastJet Zimbabwe, ProFlight Zambia. So I think at the end of the day, what's happening in 2023 is that it definitely will be a period of strong growth, of strong emergence. I think the only risk that we might face, John, is that we could, and this was actually stipulated by one of the airline CEOs in a recent interview, he said that we could very quickly go from a situation of undercapacity to overcapacity. So your fuel prices start dropping. By the time you hit March or April, you have a case of too many seats in the market. You've reached pre-COVID levels, but then your overcapacity starts to affect you and it really drops your sort of unit cost and really starts to affect you financially. So I think going back to the point, 2023 for me is probably going to be a very tricky year for a lot of the airlines to manage. You probably need some shrewd airline economics to come into place in order to ensure that you are holding a tight line. And I think you need a very, very good corporate strategy to ensure that you are aligned with the inner beliefs of what you're looking to do in the African market. But for me, the two buzzwords at the moment in this particular market in 2023, definitely rightsizing and definitely growth, I would say. And my last sort of point here, more than anything, John, would be that 2023 in the Southern African market is a very, very exciting year. We will see a lot of the fleet numbers go through the sky. We will see new operators emerge, not just after this particular pandemic, but also through key business lessons and takeaways that were taken through the pandemic. And I'm really excited to see how AviaDev can assist with growing the airline base within Africa. But I think I'm more excited as a Southern African sales director to see how this market evolves sort of 3 years on from the pandemic.
Thank you for that. A really, really interesting oversight. I think you're right. You throw so many things into the mix. You think about a global recession and we think about inflation and we think about, the COVID protocols. And then there's some really positive things on the horizon as well, such as all of the efforts that are being made on a Pan-African basis to provide free movement of people, free movement of goods, which again will drive the the cargo market in Africa too over the period as the tariff free trading starts to kick in. But of course, the thing that we've all talked about for many, many years is, of course, SATAM and the opening of the skies. I think all three of us are very well aware of Funke and the work that she's done in IATA. And I always say, you know, if somebody could do it, then it's going to be Funke. She'll be on the podcast in the next couple of weeks as well, which will be great. But what I want to understand from Embraer's side is, we've heard it, we've all been there, we've been through this process before. But what would it actually mean for Embraer? You've always been very focused on the African market, but this could potentially be a catalytic impact, right?
Absolutely. So first of all, I was just saying I'm agreeing with Funke leading this project at the helm. I think she's doing a fantastic job. I was recently on a panel discussing SATAM and where we are in terms of the progress. And then I started off by saying that this overall is the biggest Pan-African aviation project for the last decades, and it's going to be the biggest project probably from a regulatory point of view into the next decades. And it's absolutely right that we talk about it. I think we don't have to talk about all of the studies that have been done in the past. There have been great studies made. Obviously, we all know the InterVista studies. I'm not going to go into any further detail because you just have to look into other markets across the world, Northern America, Europe, Asia, where over the past decades, these markets have all gone through market liberalization, and the effects have been tremendous in terms of what's going to happen. Air travel is going to become more accessible for a much wider part of the society in Africa. I think that's very important. It still remains more of an inaccessible good at this point in time. So I think aviation, air travel is going to become more accessible. Fares are going to be lowered. Passenger numbers are going to be increased significantly. And then, of course, from an Embraer point of view, as we've seen this in other parts of the world, this is going to allow airlines to start operating without any restrictions in terms of the number of movements, frequencies, the destinations they would like to fly to. There will be a lot of new markets that will be opened. This is going to be fantastic in terms of tourism and trade. And of course, many of those markets are going to be smaller. So airlines will need to make smart decisions around how are they going to start launching those markets, which from our point of view, I think our product portfolio in terms of regional jets is ideally suited for airlines to start tapping into those markets. So we look very optimistic into the future, and coalition of the willing, right? I think that's now the phrase of the moment. I think there's been 13 countries that have fulfilled all of the requirements to move forward with a full implementation of SATAM. And I think that we really need to get those 13 countries moving forward, right? They have done all of their work to implement the requirements. So there shouldn't be anything holding these guys back. They shouldn't be penalized. As a matter of fact, I think they need to move forward now. The airlines need to start bringing and writing their own success stories in terms of new markets opened, improved financial performance of the airlines. And then what I'm hoping we're going to see is there's going to be a fear of missing out, a fear of losing out for those other nations that haven't fully ratified yet SATAM. So we really hope that in the next year and the years to come that we're going to see now the first airlines starting to fully benefit from the benefits of a liberalized air traffic market.
Yeah, and that's a really important point to be made that we've made many times and Funke's made as well, which is when Asia opened and liberalized, it didn't happen. We didn't click our fingers and all of the countries suddenly were open. It was a bit part process. It was built with the coalition of the willing. And that's always been the approach that I've heard from Rafael Cucci, from Funke, is let's go with who wants to go rather than let's wait for everybody else to join us and catch up. They'll catch up when they realize what they're missing. I think that's the way we're looking at it. And the 13 that we've got are actually big powerhouses when it comes to aviation as well. So they can really prove these studies. You mentioned the studies. We've interviewed InterVistas in the past. All the studies prove the same thing, which is everybody benefits overall as a country. There may be individual stakeholders, and there are obviously reasons why some people are more resistant than others to SATAM implementation. But obviously, as you say, what it means for you is that talk of the smaller aircraft can do multiple frequencies. Well, at the moment, they may be restricted from doing that. If suddenly those markets are open and it makes economic sense, they can utilize the aircraft more. They can really start to drive down the unit cost of operating the aircraft. So super exciting. Akie, final word to you. Obviously, you guys will be with us in AviaDev. What are you hoping to achieve from attending the event this year?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think last year's event was pretty much testament to exactly what we're looking to achieve as an OEM at one of the AviaDevs. It really is about enhancing our own relationships with the various airlines, with the various operators, the lessors, the banks, everyone that attends AviaDev. I think that's probably one part of it. The second part of it is really looking for opportunities by which Embraer can not just assist with right-sizing, fleets within a particular airline, but also providing the market knowledge, the market intelligence, the studies, and all of the literature that an airline does need to empower themselves to move from one fleet decision to another. Because at the end of the day, it's very, very important for us not just to be as a commercial company, but also to provide the market with the right amounts of knowledge and the right sort of ammunition that they need to go forward. Overall, I think AviaDev's always been a great flagship event for us in terms of relationship management, relationship building, as well as knowledge sharing. I look forward to doing that in Nairobi alongside my colleagues. And I think the most important thing is that this is a platform for us to enhance aviation connectivity within Africa. And really, we have to be at the forefront when it comes to, providing that sort of thought leadership. And we are very excited to be there, and we're very much looking forward to it.
If I may just add a final thought on this, I think we need to continue to talk about collaboration. I think AviaDev, that's always been about collaboration. And there's many ways around collaboration. That doesn't necessarily mean two airlines merging and becoming one. So I think that's going to be very important. There's 54 nations across the continent. That for me already shows the requirement and significance around further collaboration amongst the airlines, amongst all of the stakeholders. And you were just talking about also mentioning the positive moves that we've seen. And around collaboration, I think 2022, we've seen some great examples. I think one of those certainly is Airlink working together with Fly Namibia. And we'd be hopeful to see more of those collaborations in the future. It's going to make the airlines overall stronger from a financial point of view, and that's where they need to get to. And ultimately, financial stability is going to be the number one driver for the airlines also to meet environmental sustainability. Because if the airlines are not making money, then the whole discussion around environmental sustainability, from my point of view, is slightly ambiguous. So we got to aim for more collaboration on the planet and on the region, of course.
Yeah, 100%. And, we've seen it, and I'd like to think we've obviously played a part in this, but during COVID, we saw so many interlining agreements, code-sharing agreements. Like you say, there's so many different ways you can work together, but we're seeing that now. And the other thing that we're seeing through where we're at for AviaDev is we're sitting here on the 12th of January, and we have 15 airline CEOs, 30 plus airlines already registered. They're voting with their feet and saying, we want to come. They want to meet you. They want to meet each other. They want to have a proper dialogue in person, get to know, build those relationships. We're not the biggest industry in the world. We're not the biggest community. And that's what I love about it, is that when we get together, great things can happen. So I'm super excited about the event. So thank you both for joining me today, and thanks for taking part in the podcast.
Thank you, John. Thanks, Akie. Regards to both of you.
Thank you. So thank you out there to everybody in the audience for tuning in. I will put the links in the show notes to both Stephane and Akie's in profile so you can connect with them on there. But you'll also obviously be able to meet them in person in Nairobi in June. If you haven't registered yet, you want to find out more about AviaDev, what it's all about, head over to www.aviationdevelop.com to get the full rundown, or get in touch with me directly and we can have a conversation. If you did enjoy this podcast, as ever, all that we ask in return is that you hit that share button now, share it with somebody in your network that you think would benefit from having a listen. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button too, and we'll be back all the way through 2023 and beyond, spreading the word about African aviation. So we'll see you all soon. Thanks for joining us.